FDR embraces a kind of overconsumption theory, and it's otherwise impossible to interpret this statement from his inaugural, which is kind of remarkable. Plenty is at our doorstep, right? This is the very depths of the Great Depression. Plenty is at our doorstep. Really? But a generous use of it languishes in the very sight of the supply, and then rulers of the exchanges have failed. So this is the idea that we've had a glut of production and we kind of choked on the excess because we hadn't planned for it. We hadn't made sure that there would be enough demand to take up all the goods that have been produced. And if that's your diagnosis of the problem, that we had choked on an excess supply of goods, then what's your remedy for that? Well, restrict the supply of goods. And that's what the National Recovery Administration is about. Industrial cartels are formed to plan the quantity to be produced in any industry and the amount of labor to be hired and the prices to be charged. And then in agriculture, Agricultural Adjustment Act does the same thing. So you get this kind of message. There's a 13 million bale surplus, reduce crop now. This is in the depths of the Great Depression. Reduce crops now. If that seems a little crazy to you, it is a little crazy. You know, this is still our farm policy. And it makes a certain amount of sense for a single industry that if there's overproduction in agriculture, prices fall so much that even though you're selling more bales, you're getting less income. And for the cotton farmers, let's say, you can make them more profitable by restricting output and raising prices, assuming prices raise by a bigger percentage than output goes down in physical terms. So that creates a greater profit in that industry. But if you try to take that logic and apply it to every industry and say, let's have bigger profits in every industry and that'll bring revival, by having every industry cut back its output, it doesn't add up, right? You can't increase aggregate output by reducing output in every industry simultaneously. You're just going to get a smaller pie. And after a couple of years of the National Recovery Act administration, so it was the National Industrial Recovery Act, created the NRA, they gave up. Well, legally, the Supreme Court shut it down, but they didn't try to bring it back. Whereas when the Supreme Court shut down the AAA, they found a way to bring that back. Behind this idea was a guy named Rexford Tugwell. Tugwell was a member of FDR's Brain Trust. Here he is on the cover of Time magazine. So he was a fairly middling agriculture department employee or administrator. He was undersecretary, I think. But the picture on the left shows him conferring with FDR. He was a professor at Columbia. FDR had been governor of New York, so he drew his brain trust mostly from Columbia professors. And this was, Tugwell's specialty was agricultural economics, so this was his idea. Take the same logic of bringing prosperity to agriculture and apply it generally, but it meant restricting output. But that, if you read Tugwell's stuff, that's his view, that we've been inundated with goods and we have to, you know, if we manage the output, then we can make sure it's all sold, and then we'll all be better off. Right? But in the depths of the Depression, cutting output is not the way to recover, particularly since you're not going to invest more in an industry when you're cutting output, and you're not going to hire more people if you're trying to restrict output. Just doesn't add up. So this is just one of a list of perverse policies that were enacted in the Depression, and not just in the US, but in other countries too. And it's a bipartisan effort. Hoover has some bad policies. FDR has bad policies. Hoover used to call businessmen into the White House and tell them not to cut wages because that would reduce the purchasing power of their employees. Well, it would reduce the purchasing power of the employees they still had. But if you don't cut wages, then a lot of people are disemployed when prices are falling and output is falling. You just can't afford to hire as many people at the same wages. So what you really want to look at is the entire wage income, not just the wage rate, and ignore the number of people who can be employed at that rate. So that was a mistake. The Smoot-Hawley tariff, of course, didn't help, although estimates of its size, impact, since the trade sector was fairly small in the overall U.S. economy, the size of the impact of the Smoot-Hawley tariff is not really big enough to explain the Great Depression. It's a small fraction of it. Federal Reserve policy, which I may talk about next time. The Reconstruction Finance Corporation, that was Hoover's attempt to prop up failing enterprises, but that basically kept new enterprises from getting loanable funds because they were going to support the old failing enterprises. So bad money was going after good. I mentioned the National Industrial Recovery Act and the AAA. That restricts output, that delays the Depression. There's some new research on that from economist named Leo Haney at UCLA, who's been sort of documenting and estimating the size of the impact of these policies on slowing the recovery. There were tax rate hikes. The Social Security payroll tax goes into effect long before anybody starts drawing Social Security. And of course, it's a tax on employing people, so that doesn't help. FDR sort of doubles down on Hoover's don't cut wages with the National Labor Relations Act, which mandates union wages on federal projects, and so on. So there are reasons why the recovery took so long, in addition to the factors that explain why the downturn came. So these, I think, are important that aren't really covered by any of the macroeconomic theories.